Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Do you like movies?
Do you like sports?
I've never played that sport on the screen, but I really enjoyed how the movie made me feel.
Well then, have we got a show for you. The Adrian Moment is where my friend Ocean and I discuss the triangulation of sports, movies, and life.
We dive deep into the movies, discussing how they relate to and have affected our lives.
We will talk about why the sport matters to the movie, why you don't have to love the sport to enjoy the movie, and mine a few nuggets of meaning inside the story you may not have realized was really there.
After listening to our show, come join us for more conversations about the movies that portray the thrill of victory
and the agony of defeat.
Find the Adrian Moment podcast on your favorite podcast app and join us while we cover the sports you love and the ones you never think about.
You will never see sports or sport movies the same again.
Meet Zinnia.
You are being very polite to someone who is attempting to kill us.
Her wife, Saffron.
You know I'm wildly, madly in love with you.
And their best friend, Goldie.
Glad we didn't miss all the fun.
Swords in hand, they defend their city from the worst of humanity.
I am Lord Buxton Blue.
Equity Electric.
Herr Haig. Virgil Walcott. Vicious Swa.
Follow their adventures on the Swashbuckling Ladies Debate Society audio drama podcast. Available now at truestory.fm/swashbuckling.
Commencing Superhero Ethics Re-Entry Procedure. The podcast innies of both Matthew and Riki have now joined the feed. What their outies are doing, we don't know. But their innies are here, within the world of the podcast, to discuss Severance, Season 2, as well as the show as a whole. And now I will stop trying to be creepy, welcome Riki to this conversation, and say, Riki, we did some coverage on this show about Season 1. I think most of our listeners, I'm hoping, are watching Severance, but it is on Apple, which not everyone's going to watch. And so we're going to, as much as we can, talk about the issues it raises without going too deep into the show itself. And we'll try and kind of like make sure you're up to date with things. Of course, we are going to be spoiling things like crazy. So if you do want to watch the show, if you do have a way to get Apple TV, we're not going to ask you how you do it. We're just going to encourage you to do it. Watch the show, come back. But for everybody else, Riki, let's just start with kind of, what was your overall thoughts on Severance season 1?
Season 1 or 2?
Season 1, just to kind of catch us up to people have heard my and Rob's thoughts on it. Just kind of catch up to what your starting point was, and then we'll jump into Season 2.
I would say that I liked Season 1 a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A great deal. And so was looking forward to Season 2, and for me, Season 2 was a little bit of a letdown.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think that I kind of feel the same way. I feel like Severance, more than anything, is a show that it started as, what if we can use this kind of interesting sci-fi concept, namely the idea that you could be severed in your mind and have a persona that exists only at work, and that while you're at work, you wouldn't have to have any of the thoughts or feelings or memories of the person you left outside, your outie, but that also your outie would not have to deal with any of the stuff that you were doing on the inside. And so it's a commentary on the way we try to repress our feelings and our memories and our thoughts. It's a kind of commentary on office culture and office drudgery, and how people sometimes talk about wishing they could just disassociate for 8 hours of the day. And it raised all sorts of great issues. And I think in Season 2, in Season 1, they started trying to build with it and play with it and bring about a plot. But Season 2, they really tried to run with that plot a lot further. And I feel like, as we're going to talk about, I love the questions that they're raising. I love the way they're continuing to discuss them. But I feel like they tried to take us a lot deeper into that plot and to make that plot a lot more convoluted and complex without really answering all the questions that they're setting up, instead just making things seem weirder and weirder and more surreal, in ways that kind of fit into a lot of the mystery box culture stuff that I'm not really a big fan of. So I've definitely enjoyed Season 2. I'm glad I watched it. I think there's a lot to talk about, but I think I would agree with you. I like Season 1 more.
Yeah, I'm glad you used the phrase mystery box because that was definitely at the forefront of my mind when
Uh
watching
huh.
this show. It does a good job of that. And then one of the things I've read about season 2 is that it asks more questions than it answers.
Yes.
And that is like a hallmark of mystery box type shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like it. I used to like it, but then I
Yep.
kept watching shows that didn't answer all the questions and kept asking more and more and expanding the lore in ways that are not satisfying. And that was definitely something that I felt in season 2
Yeah.
was like you're giving us like all these things, but they're still not connecting to me in a satisfying way. And I think you have to have some satisfying connections in a season of television
Yeah.
that makes you go, "Oh, okay, that's what's going on." And that in addition to the mystery, continuing mystery is what brings you back.
And I think you're right about that. I think this is kind of where we're going to start. And this is more kind of TV critique maybe, but I think it's connected because it talks about like the kind of what we enjoy in terms of the journey that TV shows take us on and the questions that they raise, etc. This is a show that loves to play with the surreal, where there's a lot of things that just everyone accepts as for granted that to us as outsiders seem very weird and kind of completely out of left field, and that they have little dance parties among the group, and they melon parties are a way that people get celebrated, and there's just all kinds of random things like this. And I think part of the problem is that a lot of the plot developments we learn more about sort of the lore of this company Lumen that's behind this Severance, because we've moved from not just sort of asking this question of like, what about if this was just a benign procedure, but now learning that there's actually this dark conspiracy behind the company that's leading this procedure. But at the end of the season, we still have no idea really what that is.
It's a cult,
It's
right?
definitely a
Like, do you
cult.
get
Yeah,
that feeling?
it's very much a cult. But I think where I'm going with, and tell me if this is kind of how you feel as well, when everything seems kind of like the next development is random and the next development is out of left field, the next development is as well, it's hard to find the patterns. And I think what sometimes,
Yes.
for me, really satisfying in a show is when you can start to say, oh, okay, I didn't expect twist number 2 and I didn't expect twist number 3. But
But
twist
the
number 4, I
clues need to
kind of
have
sort
been
of,
there.
yeah, you can kind of like see the pattern, and now you can kind of start to anticipate, and your viewing of the show changes as you're no longer totally out of left field. You're kind of thrown into the world, but you're starting to figure it out. And I feel like you're right. I just have so many more questions than I do, and I don't know if this is the case, but I think if I'm remembering correctly, things I've read from the people who wrote the show confirm this. I find that a good general rule about how much I enjoy mystery box shows is when the writers start writing the mysteries, have they already figured out all the answers? And there are shows that do that, and I think wind up being wonderfully put together because of it, because they do plan on coming up with the answers eventually for you, and they've already planned them out. And there's less of a feeling of like they're just throwing stuff at the wall. And then, like, J.J. Abrams has famously said about Lost that he didn't have any idea where everything was going. And I think it really shows in the show. Battlestar Galactica, one of my favorite science fiction shows, a really good one. But I think really suffered because they kept adding more mysteries and they didn't actually have an idea of where it would end. And this is definitely feeling like that first one to me. And I think part of why I'm frustrated by it is because it feels like it's kind of obscuring the actual really interesting questions that the show was raising about personality and about who we are and about the choices we make and about office work and all these things. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, I wish the show was doing more of the stuff that I wanted it to do. And other people may love the way it went, and that's totally legitimate. But it's, for me as the ethicist, that's what I want to focus more on.
Yeah, I agree. Like the whole culty vibe, one of the big things we got in season 2 was the goats. Or they expanded on the goats and we got
Right.
to learn like the whole department of mammalian whatever. And then they were getting ready to sacrifice a goat. And again, that's like this is some kind of cult, like it's very satanic,
Right.
etc. And we don't really know what that means. And at some point, in theory, hopefully, they explain like this is what the goats are for. But
Right.
it as you said, it like feels random. It does not feel like a thread where we, the audience, can figure it out beforehand through the
Right.
clues. I mean, we can take some random stabs at it, but it's just like I don't know.
Yeah,
Shrug.
it could be anything.
It could be anything.
Well, and so let's pull it to some of the questions that the show really is asking that I think are fun to talk about, even if we don't necessarily love the way they're trying to answer them. Um, One of, I think, the big questions about the show is this idea of literally the severance itself, of can you kind of have these two aspects of your personality? And I think, like a lot of good science fiction, a lot of what the show is doing is taking things that we think of metaphorically, like I've got my work Sona and my, work wife and stuff like that. And isn't that funny? But of course I go home to my real life and things like that. And it's kind of taking that to a logical extreme of what if you really fully could sever those things. Having now watched 2 seasons of it, if we take away the cult stuff, if we take away a lot of that, what do you think of this general idea and how it's playing out of is it ethical to have these 2 different parts of your persona that are fully separated like this?
Yeah, that's my favorite part still of
Yeah.
this show, is that essentially each actor plays 2 characters.
Right.
And we are finally seeing the 2 characters in the same body start to interact. Not directly, obviously, because that is impossible. But we do get some interesting scenes with the video camera recording and talking to themselves.
Right.
But
Yeah.
especially the character of Dylan, right, played by Zach Cherry, having a second relationship with his wife was probably the most interesting thing to me that happened this season.
Because one of the things the show sets up is that they want the innie to really know almost nothing about the outie, because they want it to be really just you're only there for work and you don't have these outside things. But they're finding that there's a natural curiosity, and so they want to slowly give people very generalized information. And again, it's all done in this wonderful parody of sort of office self-help culture that's really great. But one of the things that happened in the first season is that Dylan's outie kind of broke containment. And there's a moment where when Dylan's innie. And so there was a moment when Dylan's innie is the one in control of the body, he recognizes that he has a son and that he has a wife. And it haunts him because now he knows these things. And so he wants to start having visits, and the woman who his outie is married to starts coming to visit him, and he starts to develop feelings for her. And just to give you some contrast, the 2 other kind of relationships that we have are the Mark S., who's kind of our main character, I think, played by. Say again?
The character is Scout. The actor is Scott.
Scout. Thank you. Sorry, it's Adam Scout. Adam Scott playing Mark Scout, also known as Mark S. In general, the full name is the outie. The initial is the innie. And he's our kind of main character who's figuring all this out, and his innie wants out. And there's a whole much more complication to his character, but basically his outie has realized that he and his wife were kind of like taken into this program without their full consent in some ways, that his wife, who we thought was dead, might actually still be alive inside the system. And he wants to use his innie to go find her, but meanwhile his innie is developing relationships for another innie. And there's a conflict there about, what's going to happen. And if Mark can fully get himself out, what will happen to the innie? And then the third is the character of Henny. And Henny's innie is kind of one of the most rebellious, one of the ones who's most fighting this, one of the ones who's most like, I don't want to be an innie. And we find out that her outie actually is the daughter of the person running the company. And so her outie is even more so like pushing her innie to force her to be in there. And we saw some of that in season 1. It becomes even more so in season 2. All that is just to kind of give context to the Dylan conversation, which I'm sorry I interrupted. So kind of getting back to Dylan, what really struck you about how that played out, about having the innie start to develop a relationship that he wanted with the woman who the outie was married to? And the conclusion that it comes to is that the outie severs his severance. He wants to stop working at this company, which means that the innie, for all intents and purposes, ceases to exist. And that's one of the questions that asked is that murder? Is that the killing of a person or a persona, or is it just a part of you, or how do you frame that?
Yeah, I just want to go back real quick. The character played by Britt Lauer, her name is Helly.
Helly, sorry, thank you.
the innie character, and the outie is Helena.
Thank you. Yes.
But yeah, so where to start? Like the thing with Dylan is I found it, I guess, funny because he's essentially in a love triangle or
Mm-hmm.
square. I don't even know what kind of shape it is, right? Because his outie is married to his wife, and then she comes to visit the innie on the severed floor, and then as you said, the innie also develops feelings and falls in love and even reproposes to his own
Right.
wife, and she's in this position where it's it's the same body, like it's the body of her husband that she loves,
Right.
but the persona, the personality is so different that she actually, my belief is that she falls in love with the innie as she's falling out of love with the outie,
Right.
and we
And,
get these interesting scenes of that conflict.
and part of what's going on in that is that, as mentioned, one of the reasons why some of these people do severance isn't just because they don't want to have to deal with the drudgery of office work. It's because in their day-to-day life they're carrying all this pain with them, and or sadness or ennui or whatever it is, and they don't want to deal with that 8 hours of the day. And in Dylan's case, it's made him kind of a jerk to his wife. And so part of the issue is not only that the innie develops feelings for the woman that his outie is married to, but also that the she starts to develop feelings for him, in part because she reminds him of the Dylan that she first fell in love with, who the guy she's actually married to isn't really that guy anymore.
Yeah, and what this show does with Dylan is it asks the question about like work experience and skills. And you and Rob talked about this in the previous episode, but Dylan, the innie, is good at his job, right?
Right.
And he's proud of that. He's got his little like achievement awards on his desk. And the outie doesn't have those skills. So there's a brief moment at the beginning of season 2 when Dylan is fired for having instigated the incident at the end of season 1, and he goes to these job interviews, and he's like, on his resume it says he worked at Lumen, but he was severed, so he doesn't have any skills from that. He doesn't have work experience that he can cite and be like, yeah, I'm good at this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's part of what I guess drives Dylan's depression or ennui, as you called it,
Right.
right? And makes that character less desirable
Right.
to his wife, because he is not gaining that satisfaction of doing a
Right.
good job at work. And that is like in our real lives, like that can be a part of your personality, and what makes you a person, right? Is the happiness you gain from a job. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about, wouldn't it be nice to sever and just like disassociate from your job? But it's approximately a third of our lives, or a
Yeah.
quarter, right? Time wise, and that can can make you who you are.
No, I think that's definitely true, and I think we span job there, talk about like homemaking and stuff like that. It's not just like being paid to do something, but um, one of the things I think that is so fascinating. Again, this is the kind of thing I wanted the show to explore more. Is I think one of the points of the show, especially in season one, but also in this one, is that a problem with the modern office environment is that a lot of people aren't getting that, because what they're doing is just moving numbers around from one box to another, or shuffling papers and emails, and they're one cog in this much larger machine, and it's hard to see that they are actually getting anything, and that a lot of people go to work and don't come home with that kind of feeling. And that what the show kind of posits is the idea that if you actually, part of it is that there's this disconnect between the part of ourselves, as you said, that's all those other things that we bring with us into the office, that want to be doing more than just moving numbers from one box to another. But that if you cut all of that off, that Dylan, with all that cut off, where all he knows is because it literally is just moving numbers from one box to another without any idea of the context of it. And that's one of the mystery boxes that's kind of teased at, but not really fully explored in the show, again, to the frustration. But the point is very much that the workers don't know, but because they don't have any context for that, and they are given these little awards of like, hey, you did well, you get a melon party, you get a dance party, you get these little things, it is enough for Dylan's innie. And I think that's the irony, is you're right. I think Dylan's outie is completely denied the satisfaction of a good job at work that Dylan's innie gets. But I think what we're supposed to think is that if Dylan's outie was doing this kind of, part of why it happened in the beginning is that if Dylan's outie was bringing all of himself into the office, he'd be incredibly dissatisfied by doing this kind of work. And that's kind of the catch-22 at the heart of all of it.
I disagree with that.
Okay.
Because, I mean, innie Dylan is very happy, like, with his work, right?
Right.
I would, and the work itself, like you say, it's just moving the numbers, and the characters don't know why they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is shown that they gain like a weird emotional satisfaction from doing it, and they don't know why. They just feel it. They're like, these numbers feel good, these numbers feel bad, and moving them into the correct boxes like gives them an emotional satisfaction. And that's why they keep doing it, even at the point where they are trying to rebel against Lumen.
Right. I agree with you. I guess my thought, and this may be my bias because I'm someone who's never been comfortable in an office setting, so maybe I'm the wrong audience for this. I feel like part of the point, though, is that the reason they're able to find that satisfaction is because they're bringing nothing else into them. You know, they're not thinking about their brother-in-law who has a job that they really love and gets to do this meaningful work, and they're comparing themselves to that. They're not thinking about all the stuff they've seen on TV about people who have good jobs or bad jobs. They're just not bringing all that baggage in with them. Because you're right. I think Lumen has created a situation where for these people's innies, they can be very satisfied at work. And here again is our frustration, because maybe we wish they'd explored this further. My take was that they were saying, like, but if a fully realized person wouldn't be satisfied with this in the same way, they wouldn't get that same emotional satisfaction. And maybe Dylan's the exception, but I think for the most part, it wouldn't be the case.
I don't know if it's that they wouldn't gain a satisfaction. Again, this is the mystery box aspect, but I think what's going on is that they need to be severed in order to be able to do that work, is what seems to be implied.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's like I don't know. I think it's that they're going to show that something in the brains needs this disconnection, disassociation, in order to be able to identify the four, what are they? The four humors? No, that's not the word. But it's like the four emotions of Kier Egan as part of this cult.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, so what did you think of the way it ended in terms of the outie getting to decide that he's going to, I think most of us think is perfectly legitimate, take a different job, go to a different area, go do change what they're doing, but that the result of that is that this aspect of their persona that's given its own sentience and its own worth is just ended, turned off, which is in effect killing it.
You're talking about Dylan, right?
Right. We're going to get Mark-Ass faces that conundrum and fights back about it in a way that any Dylan doesn't. We'll get to that. But I think Dylan's for that reason, we're meant to see Dylan to kind of frame the question that then Mark-Ass is going to wrestle with.
I think
just
that
for Dylan's sake.
Dylan, initially, it's the innie Dylan who asks for termination. Right? And then outie Dylan actually denies him that.
Oh, no, yes, you are correct. Okay, yeah. So I apologize to our viewers. Normally we try to watch these things right when we try to record these things fairly soon after we've seen them. Or if not, at least just kind of keep them fresh. In this case, it finished a little while ago. We were trying to record with Rob, but schedules just didn't line up, so we're now recording a little bit after that. And in that time, both Last of Us and Andor have been coming out, which have been incredibly heavy, and so I'm mixing up some of the details. So that's my apology there. So
it's also just confusing because it's the same actor,
right?
And we're trying to talk about two different versions of him, and the word innie and outie are not normal words that we really use contextually normally for characters. So I'm gonna try to rephrase this again. So the innie Dylan has been meeting his outie wife. They fall in love, and he proposes, and she's like, "No, like I can't do this. It's too weird," and leaves. And that breaks innie Dylan's heart, I guess you would say, and he just wants to end it. Essentially, like I would say, like he wants to commit suicide, right?
Right.
By ending his existence. Like that is the implication that this show wants us to have about the innie outie situation. And when an innie terminates their employment at Lumen, like they are going to cease to exist.
Right. And I think there you're right. And I apologize. As you're saying, it's all coming back to me. It's raising kind of a related issue of that. What rights do the innie have? Because I think part of what comes up for him is that what he's realizing is that the outie creates this person in order to serve their own desires and needs. And they may be very legitimate ones, to not have to deal with in office 8 hours a day, or to not have to carry with you the pain of the loss of a wife, as Mark S. does, Mark Scout, etc. But that part of what happens is this sense of like, if you're creating a whole other persona, you're creating a whole person whose literal purpose of existence is to suffer so that you don't have to suffer. And I think that's part of what Dylan's pushes back on. Is like, hey, he doesn't want to carry all this weight for Dylan the outie if he can't even have relationships, if he can't have his own self-actualization with a woman he has come to care about.
Yeah. But outie Dylan denies the request and writes him a letter. And it was a beautiful letter. And really, like, I think that letter is why the Dylan story is my favorite, because outie Dylan talks about how, yeah, like the reason like this is all happening this way is that outie Dylan has lost some of his spark for life.
Right.
And he recognizes that his wife sees that spark in innie Dylan. So he's like, that is still a part of me somehow. And he uses a phrase like, I want to be the man that you are, like, for my wife, right? Like to
Right.
find that again in myself. And I just found that really touching in an interesting way, because it asks this question of, yeah, like who are we? Like, what is identity? And other characters have gone through reintegration, and you wonder, like, is this going to end with Dylan being able to reintegrate his two different personalities and be like the single happy person again?
And I think this is also where the metaphor of it becomes really powerful, because I think Severance is taking this to an extreme that none of us go to. And I do want to say here, by the way, that they worked with science advisors, most specifically. I had the name of it a second ago. Hold on. They worked with science. They worked with a number of science advisors, most specifically Dr. Vijay Argawal, who is the medical consultant for the show and also the chief of the skull base and minimally invasive neurosurgeon. And also the chief of skull base and minimally invasive neurosurgery division at Mount Fiora Medical Center. And one thing they're very clear on is that they didn't want this to be seen as a reference to dissociative identity disorder, what used to be thought of as multiple personality disorder, that this is scientifically distinct. So I'm not using that as part of the metaphor, because I think they're very clear that that's not what this is. But, a lot of us code switch. A lot of us do have a persona that we adopt with one group of friends, but not necessarily with another, or maybe with work or versus with family, and especially in I have not had to personally experience this, to be sure, but this is definitely true for people who are from backgrounds where the dialects and languages and just accents that they use are really judged in the workplaces that they go to, or the culture or things like that, for racial reasons or other kind of discrimination reasons. But also just people who just have, like, they want to have kind of like, I have my baseball friends and I have my Magic the Gathering friends, and I want to keep myself kind of separate in those ways. And this is really kind of pushing that to that extreme of asking, like, to what extent is using how are you kind of using one part of you to serve other parts of you, and what damage does that do? And you're right. I'm having trouble talking about it because I think that's, I don't want to I don't want to get into art critics about the show, but I think this is the storyline that I wish we'd gotten so much more of. Excuse me, that I wish we'd gotten so much more of instead of maybe some of the Lumen lore, because I think this is, and maybe it's just because they weren't really ready to explore this in more depth, but I would be really interested to hear more about this, of how these, how these characters feel about it.
Yeah, the Dylan stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Again, to me, like, this was my favorite part
Yeah.
of season 2, and exploring the fact that he is the same person. Like, the outie talking about, like, I used to be like you, and I lost
Right.
that, and like I want to try to find that again. And it feels truer to what I want Severance to be versus the Mark Scout story. So that's like part of my personal projection.
Right.
Is it's certainly interesting from a drama perspective
Right.
that the two aspects of Mark are in conflict
Right.
with themselves. I don't even know how to phrase it, right? But it's less interesting to me as
Right.
a moral and ethical discussion. I just love the way that Dylan gets to act,
Yeah.
with himself. And the Mark scene where he talks to himself via a video camera recorder,
Mm-hmm.
and like listens to himself and then records his reply and like switches back and forth, is interesting. It was a fun scene. It was very,
Yeah.
Gollum and Smeagol,
Mm-hmm. Well,
but I just didn't. I didn't love it.
no, I think it's fair. Let's go into more detail about what this is all about. And you're gonna have to help me with character names because I'm terrible with this, and sometimes I edit it out. But I'll be very honest here about with character names. So, and I think the identity of these people is very important, as we're going to talk about. One of the things that we learn is that part of why Mark Scout wanted to go through Severance is, as I alluded to, that one reason people do is to like not have to carry this great pain with them. And then in his case, his wife died.
Yeah.
As he understood it, his wife died. And we get to see a lot of their background, that both of them were academics. He's a white man, she's an Asian woman, and they were both kind of connected to the same university, and they had this really beautiful love story together. And he kind of just learns one day that she was killed. And what is her character's name? I know the actress is one who I've seen before. She was in Altered Carbon. She did a fantastic role, and she's had a couple other smaller parts. But do you have on hand the name of the actress?
Yeah, so the actress is Deechan Lockman.
Okay.
As you said, she was in Altered Carbon. She was also in Dollhouse, which I don't know if you remember that show, but we may want to talk about the similarities in the shows. Her character, the outie, or the person who was the outie, is Gemma Scout, because they were married. And her innie is called Miss Casey.
Right.
And we don't really know why.
And her innie is presented in season 1 as though she's part of the staff, and that the staff don't have outies and innies. They just are people, but they're there to kind of keep the innies on track, and that she's kind of like a therapist combined with HR in your worst nightmares, and that her role there is to kind of like keep you on track and to prevent you thinking things you shouldn't think. Wow. But over the course of season 1, Mark realizes that this Miss Casey is his wife Gemma, and because there's a whole bunch of shenanigans that lead to that. And so in season 2, again through a bunch of shenanigans that I feel we kind of skipped, he finds someone else who worked for the program who's tried to kind of reintegrate the outie and the innie, and he has that happen to some extent where he can now at least remember the innie's memories, and to some extent can kind of switch at will, or at least with some help, between his outie and his innie. And he now comes up with a plan that he wants to basically like use his innie to figure out what happened to his wife and to get her back, which seems, I think, completely reasonable. And things go along, and the plot develops, and some of his outie's friends and family are helping him, until at some point the innie realizes what it's expected of him, and that if they go through with this, the innie will eventually just be fully cut off, and that's where we're really thinking about a persona, a personality, but that a personality that in its own mind is fully sentient, a fully separate being, is going to stop existing, and perhaps therefore the word for that is die. And further complicating matters is that he has developed the innie has developed very strong romantic and sexual attraction and feelings, and that are requited, like they have a relationship with Heli. Heli, is it Hela or Heli?
The innie is Heli.
Heli, thank you.
The
Right,
outie is Helena.
Helena.
And they very like intentionally make those distinct because they are
Right.
very different
And
characters.
very different than like Dylan, where it's literally the same, or Mark Scout, Mark S, where they're fairly similar. And then in the last episode, big spoilers here, the innie agrees to go along with a plan, even though he's very hesitant about this and uncomfortable with it. But in the final moments, he allows Gemma to escape and gets the innie, fully gone. The Gemma has escaped, but instead of then going back outside so he can be Mark Scout and go off with Gemma, he decides to stay inside and be Mark S with Heli. And this is where both me and Mary, my spouse, who was watching this with me, had a lot of problems, both for ethics reasons but even more so for just, it didn't seem to make logical sense to us. We didn't really understand what was happening. It felt like a betrayal, but also kind of understood where he was coming from. But I think there's a lot of other. I want to let you talk about it first, because I think you pointed out some stuff that I kind of had a surface grasp of, but you really saw it a lot deeper.
I just fully got mad.
Yeah.
And after we finished watching the final episode, I think I even used the words "I hate it."
Yeah.
And like, I don't hate it. Like, it was still an enjoyable season, but it left me with a really bad taste in my mouth at the end.
So talk more about why.
Well, I mean, first off, like, it just feels like the wrong decision. You said, like, from a logic, right? From a logical perspective of character or like
Right.
the premise of the show.
Like, it should be named, this is not Mark and Heli going back into everything being fine. This was like a prison break where multiple people from the Lumen staff were killed. The idea that Mark and Heli are going to get to just go back to normal is completely not the case.
So, from a logical perspective, Mark S and Heli are the innies. They can only exist on the severed floor because of the way this technology works.
Right.
So at the end, they run off together, but they're trapped on this floor. They can't like live a life together outside, right? And more to the point, Heli, her outie is Helena Egan, one of the bosses of Lumen. So like when the executives at Lumen realize what has happened, they're not going to be happy. They're not going to let her stay Heli. They're going to force her to become Helena again. Like they're going to remove her from the floor and be like, what the heck happened down there? So there's like no happily ever after here at the end of this.
Yeah.
So like they run off and they're like holding hands and it's like the music is like, yeah, like triumphant or something. I'm like, what the heck? Like, this isn't going to work out. So that was like my A level response, which I think like you mentioned is like the logic of the situation.
Right.
My B level response was as like a television movie fan / critic. I was like, I rolled my eyes. I was like, well, here we go again. A white guy just left his Asian wife / girlfriend for the manic pixie dream girl white girl. It very much reminded me of Scott Pilgrim versus the World in that sense.
Yeah, I can see that.
And there's a lot of other problems with that and like the age of Knives Chow. But
there's
like,
an underage Chinese girl who's part of the power structure in just a very weird way that is what I thought of when you mentioned Scott Pilgrim. But I think you're so right about the racial dynamics there, especially because, and don't get me wrong, I love Adam Scott as an actor. I think he's phenomenal, and I think the character of Mark S is great. And I don't want to live in a world where, like, we're saying like no white men can ever be heroes. But it is kind of striking that, like, of the 4 people who are in there with him, his 3 other coworkers who were a gay man who has been kind of pushed back onto the outside and tried to build a relationship with his outie is trying to build a relationship with the person that his innie fell in love with, another man, and kind of gets rejected and then kind of just disappears from the show.
Yeah, he just left.
There's the black man who's part of the staff, who's kind of just their enemy, who they're fighting against the whole time. There's the white woman who he has run back into prison with, but there's never really a discussion of her getting freedom. And then there's the Asian woman who has been freed, but also freed to, as much as she understands it, watch her husband reject her for the white woman. And it's one of those things where I don't think any of those racial dynamics are intentional, but just and also, of course, the man of color, Dylan, having a pretty negative experience compared to that. And so it was when you mentioned the thing about the dynamic there of him leaving the Asian woman for the white woman, which I confess I don't think I really kind of thought of consciously in the first moment. But I remember hearing you say that and looking at it through the further lens of just everything else that happens in the season and the dynamics. It really does not leave a good taste in the mouth.
Right. So it's complicated because I'm not. What do I want to say about this? So there's this concept of, it's called yellow fever, and especially when it pertains to Asian women, is that Asian women are exotic, right?
Yeah.
Like, and this goes back to like the whole Madame Butterfly thing and like the way geisha have been portrayed in media and used in Western media. And there are very few cases of, like, in rom-coms, there's very few cases of like a white man and an Asian woman pairing in
Right.
rom-coms. And of course, like, you could say that there have been very few Asians, right? Like as the romantic lead, and especially like in the 80s and 90s, they were just like the comedic side characters, right?
Right.
And that was definitely bad. But and in modern rom-coms, especially since like Crazy Rich Asians, we've seen a lot more Asian
Right.
pairings. And then like even now, Asian man, white woman, like Henry Golding is like the dude right now in terms of rom-com leads. But even there's a great rom-com called Love Hard, which I just love, and it's based on Love Actually and Die Hard, like the 2 quote unquote Christmas movies, and like smashing those names together. And the lead in that movie, the male lead, is Jimmy O Yang, who is a Asian comedian who, like, I'm gonna say, like, he looks like me. Like, I would never be mistaken for him, but he's a dorky Asian guy with glasses, and he's the lead in a rom-com. And like that to me is like, yes, this is great, this is revolutionary, but he's paired with a white woman. And that's what I mean is like the Asian woman in media is often like the exotic person, but is not the romantic interest of like a traditional rom-com.
I think you're really right, because as I was thinking about it, I was thinking of, but wait, there's lots of times when the Asian woman is the romantic counterpart to the white man, but it's in action movies.
Oh yeah,
where
like
she
Michelle
gets to
Yeoh.
be like, almost as good as kung fu as he is, or whatever the martial art is, but still gets to fall for him. And I don't remember if this is something I've completely come up with on my own, or I'm sure other people have written about this, and I've probably seen it, but also was thinking about it beforehand. I don't know, but like, I would love to see people who've done analysis that I feel like in many ways, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl is a whitening of the exotic, sexy, mysterious Asian woman. You know, in kind of the same a lot of ideas, especially when you look at like how much of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl aesthetic is kind of like the anime girl aesthetic. And I think you're very right. It's not in rom-coms because it's not there. She's not taken seriously as there. She would have to be taken seriously as a romantic lead, as opposed to in the action movie where it's kind of just like you beat up the bad guy, you get the girl.
Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And Michelle Yeoh actually, like, she was in a Bond movie. I think it was Tomorrow Never Dies, where she was
Mm-hmm.
also the final Bond girl, and they had their romantic fling at the end.
Right.
And that was really revolutionary, I feel like, in terms of the positioning of Bond girls, as she was also like a tough spy, like a
Oh yeah.
competent counterpart to him, which they have had, like going back to The Spy Who Loved Me from Russia with Love, I think. But I think she was like very different and very modern.
Right. Well, in a lot of those movies, as you said, there's the final Bond girl. Because we've talked in other episodes recently about how Bond often has a first woman who he seduces who's connected to the villain who then gets killed because she was with Bond. And there's a number of those movies that I remember. I think this is some with Sean Connery, but a lot with Roger Moore, where he's infiltrating some, Chinese potentate or some, again, very racist portrayed. And often, like, he's the first girl he's with is Asian, but then he winds up with a white woman by the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and plenty of other action movies. Like when an Asian woman's cast, it is often because of their martial arts skills.
Right.
So they are like a sidekick in the action movie, but not the love interest. So that to me, like with this show, like it's not an action show, but the fact that like they focused on Gemma as this object of, I mean, she's the damsel in distress, literally, right? And they rescue her, and that should be the happy ending. Like, you have rescued the damsel, and now you're gonna be with her, but not. And she's Asian, and it was very difficult for me watching that to not make that association. Like, obviously, like the show will go on, and they will address it, and there will be more drama that happens between all this. But I'm just like very worried that somehow she's at the end of it all, she's not going to be his wife anymore, and he's going to end up with Helly/Helena.
Oh, I think it's absolutely the way it's going. Unless there's some way of, I mean, like, the polyamorist in me is always like, come on, let's everybody find a way to be together. But I don't really know how that works with the severed personalities. But I think for me, like, all the stuff you're talking about is very true. And it's doubly frustrating because, to me, there's a very interesting question of, at what point does the innie have rights of its own? At what point does the innie stop being this part of the outie that the outie can use and, if need be, discard for its own actualization, versus being a fully sentient being that has, therefore, all of its own rights and shouldn't be killed? And I find the discussion between Mark Scout and Mark S over whether Mark S should be destroyed in order that Mark Scout can have a happy life fascinating. And when that's reduced to which woman will he be with, it feels like it very much cheapens Gemma and all the racial aspects you're talking about there. But it's also just kind of misogynistic in general, because it's also like saying, well, the whole conflict is now just about like which of this love triangle aspect, instead of this philosophical question of who is he, and can he be a unification of these two selves, or does he have to pick one or the other? And it just felt like deciding to represent those two as one woman or the other. It just felt very tropey, and maybe I'm coming down so hard on it because it's a show that has for the most part passed those bars so well, but I felt like it changed the main question away from the one that I thought was really interesting towards one that we've seen a million times before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to go back real quick before I move on that to the whole rom-com thing. I want to acknowledge that there have been several good rom-coms. I think on Netflix, there was To All the Boys I Loved Before, which I believe the romantic lead is Lana Condor.
Yep, and she's Korean, and half Korean, half white, and it's a really beautiful story.
Yeah, there were two of those movies in that series, and I loved them, and they're really good. So like I think the trend is definitely changing and getting better, and I hope to see more of it. Lily and Dash was another one I watched.
Right.
So I want to acknowledge that, and I'm not saying like throw them all away, like, but we need more, we need better always. Like that is my desires, like more and better, please.
Yeah.
Like let's keep going, and let's try not to regress too much. So there's that. Regarding Mark, in that Gollum conversation with himself, when Mark Scout, the outie, mentions like the reintegration process, I think the innie like correctly brings up the point, like, well, you've lived 30 years and I've lived for two,
Right.
2 years slash only at work. So like a third of 2 years. And what is that going to look like if we reintegrate? Like you're going to be 90% of us or me.
Right.
And yeah, like that ends up being boiled down into this which woman thing. And I agree, like that it's much more, the question is much more interesting than which
Mm-hmm.
woman will he end up with. Like the aspect of like 90% of him will be the outie is to me much more interesting, and like, oh yeah, what would that look like?
Right. Yeah, I think so, and I think it's funny. I was trying to think about. I was curious where we would come down on this show, and I didn't think we'd wind up being this negative. And again, there were a lot of parts of the show that I really enjoyed, and I am looking forward to a season 3, especially if we But I really want some firm answers. But I think that this just was a. I don't know. It is so hard to capture lightning in a bottle twice, and we'll talk about Andor a bit in the bonus section for members. But I think there was a lot of questions about would season 2 sort of capture that again, and I think season 1 was just so interesting and so out there, and season 2 really had this question of like, are you going to therefore continue down those roads, or are you going to sort of say, okay, now that we've built this really interesting sandbox, we're just going to tell you stories you've heard before? And I'm just disappointed they went more the second direction.
I'm gonna say that I really enjoyed maybe like the first 2/3, 3/4 of season
Mhm.
2, but
That's fair.
I just think that the ball was dropped at the end. Like if we want to talk about stuff I loved,
Yeah.
the episode where the outies go on like the expedition in the snow-covered mountain
Mm-hmm.
was a fantastic episode. Not
Yeah.
just like how interesting it was, but the cinematography was great.
The
And I
cinematography was gorgeous, and it's funny how both this and a couple other things I've watched recently have felt like that the writers were really good prognosticators, because they were basically saying, if our current situation continues, it could turn into this like parody of the end of the line. And the reality is it's turned into that already. At least to some extent, because all of this corporate the cult of the corporation, I think they very much were thinking about Elon Musk. They very much were thinking about Steve Jobs. They very much were thinking about these sort of cults of personality that have built up around these people. And, they didn't write it in the last year and a half, but certainly in the last year and a half, like a lot of people probably even forgotten about people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, because Elon Musk has so much become that. And the degree to which, like, I was watching this, wow, we were really starting to realize all the ways in which Elon Musk has so much power in the government now. And it was just hitting both me and Mary so hard. Like, these people predicted it. This is exactly what's happening. And it's terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to mention the other episode kind of in the middle of the season that I loved was when Harmony Cobell, the character played by Patricia Arquette, goes on her trip to her old hometown,
Oh, yeah, that's
where
right.
Lumen had like some kind of factory, and like where she grew up and where she was indoctrinated like into Lumen. And those are the aspects of Mystery Box that I love, where they sprinkle in these details, and it's like, what does this all mean? And there's probably a lot of stuff in the background or the things that they said in dialogue that we don't understand yet, the connections will be made. And I think
Right.
that was a great Mystery Box episode. Killing a goat, not there for me.
Well, I think especially because one thing you captured really well is my favorite mystery boxes, and I think this again goes to where the authors know all the answers when they start the process, is ones where by the time you get to the end, you can now go back and watch it again, and the goat makes sense, and all the little weird details about the Lumen cult. You now have the context that it fits into, and you're like, oh my God, shows even better watching it the second time, knowing what I know about the answers we're finally given. And I think that's going to wind up affecting a lot of how people feel about the show, is whether or not we get there or not.
Yeah. And I think the stuff in Cobell's hometown, what it is it feels real. It feels like a real place. And then like trying to figure out what mystery took place there is interesting. And then like if there are hints and clues that later do make a connection, you'd be like, oh yeah, you can't do that with a goat. You can explain the goat and tell us, but there's no way for us to be like, oh, that I should have known that's what the goat is for. Like, no, there's no way to know what the goat is for. They're just gonna make something up.
Filling people in, what we learn in this episode, it's really kind of a bottle episode, is that there was a story about why she left her hometown and why certain people feel the way they do about her and the way she feels about them, and like a mystery box, you're dropped right into the middle of it. There's no exposition. She doesn't like tell someone, here's the situation I'm going back home to, but by the end of the episode, you figured everything out, even to the point of you're starting to be able to guess and make those predictions because A leads to B leads to C, and now you can predict D and E. And so I think it's kind of funny. That episode was a really good microcosm of what this thing could be.
Yeah, and it did such a great job of developing her character as well. Like obviously she was in most of that episode, and I feel like it informed us about her and why she is in this cult and why she believed or still believes, and now like why she's trying to take it down. Maybe, I don't know. We still don't really know. And it also connects to the the little girl, Miss Huang. We haven't even talked about. I think we should quickly talk about Miss Huang and Milchick, right? Who are like the two supervisors on the severed floor after Cobell is fired, I guess.
Right.
Because it's fascinating. That's the part of this show that still intrigues me a lot. Is like Milchick. He's scary.
Milchick is to me again that perfect representation of the worst aspects of customer service /HR. Because he's the person who smiles all the time, but the smile never reaches his eyes. He's constantly being like, hey, isn't it great that we have good attitudes all around here? You wouldn't want to happen with what happens with bad attitudes. We're not like, it's just, he's cheery, he's upbeat, and it is so clearly like, I can't even say that it's insincere, because like I utterly believe that he has drunk the Kool-Aid, that he is part of the
he's
cult
a true believer.
Believes
for whatever reason.
But he's also like, he has no interest in actual sincere office conversations. He wants that fakeness. He wants everyone in the office to not bring in their politics or their feelings or to argue about the game last night or to argue about the movie. He wants us just to be about the work and just to be about the joy of the melon party that you get if you do the work well.
But he's still also very sympathetic in a way. Like when he gets chewed out by his boss, and he tells his boss to F off or whatever the specific phrase he used, like you kind of cheer, right? You're like, good for you, even though like you're evil.
Yeah.
You're still a part of this evil. And I think that the actor, Trammell Tillman, I think he's doing a great job. And the dance sequences, like, I hope we get a dance sequence every season with him.
Yeah.
Because he absolutely kills it every time.
He really does. Like the set piece at the end of the escape, part of it is that like he's brought in this marching band to celebrate this huge accomplishment. And then the marching band is kind of like caught up in the midst of the fight as they try to escape. And it's phenomenally done. And then, but at least I have some grounding for him. We then get what is, for all intents and purposes, I think like a 12 to 14-year-old Asian girl who is she plays the same kind of role as Milchick does. And a couple of people joke about her age, but there's never any explanation. It just is one of those surreal things of, there's a 14-year-old girl who's telling all these people in an office what to do.
But they give us the hint, right? Like at the end when Milchick sends her away, there's like a name for the fellowship or something like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're being awarded the fellowship prize.
Right.
And that's the same one that Cobell earned or won when she was a little girl
Oh, I
in her
hadn't picked up on
hometown.
that. That's really
So
interesting.
that's like the connection there is that Miss Huang is like showing us where Cobell came from.
Right. So she's
and
like a
how
high
she
school
was-
intern, basically.
Yeah, well, how she was integrated into this, indoctrinated. So that to me was like an interesting connection between them.
For sure.
I have read fan theories that try to connect Miss Huang to Gemma, and I'm like, get out of here with that nonsense.
Nice.
Because it's, I don't know, it's like there's two Asian people, they must be somehow related.
Yeah, that'd be kind of shitty.
So
that would not be fun. Well, this has been a great discussion. I feel like that, like, I kept wanting to jump into the much larger question that I think, frankly, I think we're going to do our own episode on it because this show brings it up, but other things, you know, it kind of ties into Tuvix, it ties into so many of these things. It ties into a big episode question, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is the question of, like, can this kind of severing happen ethically, or is it always going to have these kind of problems? And there's so much there to discuss. We'll definitely get into all that.
Well, yeah, like I mentioned Dollhouse earlier, which was a show that Deitch and Lockman was on, and that I was like rereading the plot.
Mm-hmm.
It's like very similar in terms of like basically personalities are wiped out, and then like new personalities are rewritten over. It's like which one is the real person? Type
I've
questions.
been meaning to watch Dollhouse for a while, so I think we're definitely going to do this as an episode soon. This may actually even be our members only episode for May. We will see. I'm going to let everyone know now. You probably heard last week we did a rebroadcast of the Star Wars episode. I'm going to do my best to make sure we're getting you new content every week, but with a lot of family things going on, the young Padawan is coming into my family pretty soon, some other family illnesses and events and funerals and stuff like that. It's just going to be a crazy time. So we do our best, but we'll definitely have that episode for you soon, as well as a lot of other great content. I'll probably watch Dollhouse soon, so we can talk about that one. And of course, if that is members only, but if not, something else would be great in members only, do you get that by becoming a member? It's only $5 a month, $55 a year. All the information is in the show notes. You can subscribe today. It's really great to help out the podcast. You get ad-free episodes. You get bonus content at the end of most episodes. We're going to talk about Andor in just a moment as our bonus content for this episode. Although, of course, even members, you can skip it until you've gone and watched Andor, which really you should have done. But, well, I'm not even going to get into that. I talked about that last week. But either way, please think about becoming a member. Thank you so much for listening. We have spoken.